Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us here for our panel. We've got our illustrious Docker thought leader, Harish, here to, yeah, yes, Academy Award-winning actor slash SE director, jack of all trades, here to lead this panel discussion. We've got some great customers up here with a lot of experience running Docker. They've been doing this for several years, so they're here to talk about how they've done that, how they've been successful, how they've sort of transformed their teams with Docker as well. So it's going to be a great session, and we should have time, I think, for questions at the end as well. But I'll let them all introduce themselves and tell you what they do.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, John.
Right. My name is Sune Keller. I'm the software architect at Alm Brand. We're a Danish insurance company, bank, and pension company. We only work in Denmark, so you wouldn't know us if you weren't in Denmark. We've been running Docker in production since 2016, I think, and are using Docker Enterprise Edition since then.
Hi, my name is Mio Safradin. I'm a Linux engineer at Bosch, and we are using Docker since 2016 as well. And I'm the service provider for the globally central container as a service platform.
Hi, I'm Don Bauer, lead DevOps engineer for Citizens Bank out of Nashville, Tennessee in the United States. We've also been using Docker since 2016, and we've been running it in prod since last year. So it was 15 months, like 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
I'm Mike No. I'm also a DevOps engineer at Citizens Bank, and personally I've been using Docker for a little over 2 years. We've been using, like I said, production for about 15, 16 months now. So.
My name is Loke Johansen. I work with Sune at Alm Brand in Denmark. Again, you probably don't know us. I actually think we've been running Docker in production since 15, if I remember correctly.
No, 15 was when UCP or Project Orca was announced, so it must be 16.
Let's just say 15.
Early days.
Sounds better. 1 year before you guys. Yay. I'm a senior system specialist there. So I do all the awesome stuff on the platform and the day-to-day operations.
Cool. Thanks for the introductions, guys. So maybe first we'll start off with a question for maybe like everybody, so you can take turns and kind of answer what your thoughts are on this. So typically, at least from what I've seen, is that it's either one team gets started with saying, let's take this project, I'm going to put this in Docker, move this, and then there's, if that teams get successful, other teams see that, and then they adopt it, and then they move forward with it. And then there comes a time where there's a centralized team, like an IT team, which comes and says, okay, we want to have this central platform for Docker, containers, and then other teams can utilize it. The question is, like, what do you guys think should be maybe the responsibilities in terms of sharing or not sharing, and like let them be on their own as well as control? Like, how do you see that as being like because it's a balance, right? So many times they come back and say, no, we've done it this way, and then they're like, no, we've standardized on this. We want you to use that. What are your thoughts on that?
I can start.
Sure.
We started actually, in Alm Brand, the developers didn't start with Docker. It was actually the operational team and Sune and another architect. We hit a snag where the company decided to invest heavily in Salesforce, so we needed to have a lot of integration services. We couldn't do that with the current platform we had. So we started the whole Docker platform in operations, and we kind of abstracted the whole Docker thing away from the developers. They still just develop like they used to, using some other programming frameworks. We decided on Spring Boot. So they didn't really have any interaction with any Docker stuff until much later, because it was more effective, well, for us to actually just abstract it completely away. And right now we're still kind of designing everything and giving them the options to use some of the frameworks that we give them. So we're kind of in the control of most stuff, pipelines and the whole access. That was our approach.
Okay, cool.
I know for us at Citizens, one of the things that we did initially, so we did bring in Docker to change how we were building and delivering software. And once we got the first round of developers on it, we quickly figured out we needed to make sure the tools stayed out of their way. So we built in the automations and the stuff around it. We set up basic templates. So if you're doing a Spring Boot project, all you have to do is just drop this template in and you're good. Same thing for several other languages, your Node, your Python, your Go. But the other big piece of that was, we wanted them to be able to stand up new environments on demand. And that gives them all of the control, and we're able to, or not all the control, but all of the flexibility they need. And through the automations that we built around that, we're able to maintain the control on our side and ensure isolation, things like that. So it's been a pretty good synergy of both, but we don't want the tools to get in their way. And now they don't even have to think about it. They can self-service, add their new service to our deployment system, and then it follows the same pipeline pattern as everything else.
Okay, good deal.
Now at Bosch, so before we had a central container as a service platform in place, developers use Docker all across business units, and so we noticed that, and we did contact them, and try to actually build virtual teams to collect the requirements, the different requirements from different projects like IoT, Industry 4.0, and based on the requirements we have received from 5 to 10 key users, key developer projects, we build up this container service platform. And so as of today, we have that's a virtual team. So we are always trying to align with new changes and that change the service accordingly. And the key is to provide a central services, and other top units now also do adapt to this approach and try to do the same pattern like the others did.
Interesting. Do you guys have anything to add? Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I think the biggest thing is just, figuring out early on what it is that you want to do. Setting a clear goal is critical to being successful with any of this, regardless if you're going to have like integrated, DevOps teams, or you're going to have like a DevOps group or like an operations group that does everything. I mean, everyone still has to be working towards the same goal. And that's
correct.
Just paramount, really.
Got it. So maybe then let's just start with the question with you. Since you talked about groups and teams, like, say suppose for somebody getting started, like what combination of a team do you think would be like a good mixture of people? You would say like, hey, let's get together and build this thing in the company, because there's one thing about the team, and then you got to take that, and then the next process of actually selling it to your upper management and all that stuff. But to start off with, what sort of a mixture of a team would you recommend for somebody starting out, maybe?
Yeah, well, in our case, like Loki said, it started out with being a need we had for rapidly adding a whole number of new integration services to our platform, and we couldn't reuse the existing platform. And so in this case, we needed to both find out, well, how do we then, what do we build instead? And we had seen at this point that Docker was at the right maturity level for us to adapt it. And so we built out a new cluster on the operations side, and at the same time we started a new team to build all these services. So it was both a set of developers who, some of them were used to the older ways of working, but we tried to make it, like Loki said, abstracted away so that they didn't have to get used to too many new things at once. They already needed to use a new framework to develop in. So we tried to keep the number of changes small. But it was a mixture of this new team that were made for developing these services, and some people from operations and from the architects group to find out how to structure everything so that they could develop as fast as possible, but we will still end up with a setup that was maintainable from operations point of view.
Got it. Thank you. That's a good one. So yeah, maybe we'll start with you then, just to continue on that process, right? So now that you formed this team, then the usual thing that typically I've seen, at least when I'm working with customers, is that the next step when they take it to and start talking to management or anybody out of there, it's that fear of risk and that, oh, it's this new thing, maybe it's still not mature. Should I jump into it? And if I jump into it, what would happen, kind of stuff. So maybe the question is like, if that has happened, how did you address it? And like, maybe what sort of, I would say, like de-risk strategies did you probably follow?
Well, in our case, we have a culture that allows for some experimentation, but obviously there are also guidelines and processes. And so in this case, we made the case in advance of starting this platform that we were on a burning platform. That's always a good way to get something done, right? I would argue that we really were. And then we could show how easy it was for us to start new services, to deploy them, and to manage them in a way that we could demonstrate was significantly faster than we could do on our existing platform, both in terms of manpower and technical abilities. And so this was a way that we convinced the management people that needed to be convinced that it was simply just a more profitable or less costly way of developing. So that was, I think, what convinced them in our case.
Got it. Did you have anything to add on this, or?
So at Bosch, it was actually very simple because there was a business transformation plan for management to go.
So it came from...
It came already top down. So actually,
that's awesome.
So the risk was already known and accepted.
Good.
So if you want to succeed in the business, in the market, we had to do it.
So that's always helps, right?
Yes.
When it comes from there.
Yes. And so the pressure was not... was from top down, and so we just delivered actually. Yeah.
Awesome. So that's good to know. So maybe this is something I very passionate about this topic on. Like, let's maybe jump in straight, maybe next into. Then I'd like everybody to answer on the orchestration piece, right? I mean, so of course there's Swarm, there's Kubernetes, there's Nomad, there's this all the orchestration solutions. At least what I've seen is sometimes people get too caught on just that one piece of just orchestration. This is my opinion, and I'd like yours as well, is that I personally think it's the end-to-end workflow that's more important than just one piece of the puzzle, because I think I was talking to you guys yesterday when I was saying it's almost equivalent of like, hey, I want to be secure, so I've closed my doors, but I've left the windows open, right? So you're not fully secure at that point. So like it's the end-to-end which is more important on it. How often do you think that just jumping and just getting caught on the orchestration and like having to pull away from that is something you guys have to do or had to deal with if you had to?
Well, come on. The orchestration and the automation is something I'm super passionate about.
Yeah.
And we try to make sure that we automate as much as possible. I would say the biggest thing about that though is just so, oh my God, that's such a big topic.
We got all the time, I think.
Yeah.
Take it.
So nothing has there's no right way to do it, right, for everyone. And whether you want to use Swarm or you want to use Kubernetes, I think just getting to the meat of what the service is, or whatever the application is you're deploying, and just doing it in the way that makes it the most secure and reliable for you in your situation. I mean, I think that's the biggest part of it.
Cool.
Our approach is really in regards to orchestration. We're a small team, so the main fact for us is that it needs to be as simple as possible to manage. Mm-hmm. And we offer solutions to teams. They can't really come and say, we want Kubernetes.
Yep.
We kind of ask the question back, what is your need? And then we can offer you something. Okay, you need load balancing, you need some high availability. Okay, we can offer that, but you can't tell us what product you want to use. We can offer you a solution, but we decide on the solution.
Perfect. That's awesome. Cool. Don, did you have anything to add to that? Or?
He pretty much covered it.
Okay.
He covered what I was going to say. So, it's the same kind of thing. Now we're able to offer them the choice on our end, but at the end of the day, picking the one that meets your needs and gets you from committing a line of code to that code being in production, whatever best supports that, that's the most important thing to focus on.
Got it. Cool. So this is, again, I actually wrote a lot of these questions, which my customers ask me as well. And I faced it as well. So that's why most of these questions are coming from. The whole concept of new applications versus traditional applications. Should I move them to Docker? Should I throw them away? Should I go start rewriting them? It's that, I don't know how much of a big flowchart my whiteboard has in my office right now, but that's how much it's wanted to. So obviously everybody has their own vision and idea about how to go about doing this. Like maybe in your organization, like what have you guys kind of like challenged as far as teams? Like, hey, why don't you try and take that app and simply move to Docker? Or have you been like, hey, okay, let's just go rewrite this whole thing? If so, if you did one or the other, what and what were the parameters that helped you make that decision? Again, it's open, but I'd like to hear from everybody if you don't mind. Sure.
Yeah. In our case, it's actually kind of a boring answer because it's just whatever is a business need.
Okay.
So in our case, we start with a lot of greenfield development, and we used that to harden and stabilize our platform. But it wasn't long after that we started getting questions about, well, how about all these legacy apps that we're running? We have all these operations issues with them. They can crash when they deploy and all these kind of things. And they were an obvious choice for containerization, but should we rewrite them or change them a whole lot to do that? Well, there wasn't a big business case for doing that. They are stable applications, but which were running on an overloaded platform before. And so what we did was that, before the MTA program from Docker came about, we made our own internal one, and we started off with our largest internal application and containerized that, and went into production. Made sure to have a configurable load balancer in front of it so that we could switch traffic between the traditionally deployed version of the application and the containerized one. And then we would just ramp up traffic slowly and identify any issues that would affect a number of our users. Then we would turn traffic back down, switch over to the old version, fix the issues, and deploy again, and continue the process until it was stable. And that took, 3 months from the get-go, like when we started writing the first base image. And once that was in production, we helped with the next one, but then we formalized the process and handed it off to another team that has then continued with containerizing almost all the remaining of our legacy apps. So along the way, of course, there were some of the apps that were candidates for rewriting instead of only containerizing. And that was mostly when there was a business case for it, like making it run more efficiently or adding new features which would require developers that had experience with the former platform. In those cases, we had someone rewrite those services. It was mostly services that then would be implemented on the new platform and with the new frameworks and containerized just like everything else. I feel like the greatest part of the reason why we were allowed to continue with our own MTA program was the fact that we did this gradual ramping up of traffic, so we could do it in a controlled manner, and that we didn't go with a big bang that would kind of give a huge backlash and kill the whole effort.
So an answer is yes, containerize the stuff.
So you would say that, but even like, however complex it is, you would still say like find a way, because eventually you're going to see the benefits out of it. That's the message, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, containers it's the next logical step from VMs, right? And then if we go one more further, function-based deployments are the next, and that's something that we're trying to work towards to try to keep that progression going. You know, that we've already got so much momentum from moving to Docker and moving to microservices, and having all of that behind us in the experience now, we know that the next step is to take it even smaller, right? So.
Yeah, awesome. And just to add to that, right? I mean, even in the case of my situation as well with customers, that's exactly what. Like when we started off, there are some people who actually adopted the journey back in 2015. I mean, it was a little rough at that time with everything, but now they're just so happy that they started at that time, because like eventually, I mean, like it's like you pick the technology, you believe in it. There's going to be some issues with it, but you know, as a community and everything, I think we can all together figure it out. and they're actually seeing the benefits of those things. The announcement which our CEO made about Black Friday running everything on the entire traffic of Visa was run on the Docker E platform with the containers, right? So they started pretty early around it. So it's just a matter of time before things get solid. Great. I do have a few questions, but I want to check on time just for like the audience. Do I have time for a couple more questions? Okay, cool. So maybe let's switch gear on a little bit on like, again, containers, Docker, very heavily on the Linux side. Now recently there's this big push. We're having a big adoption of on the Windows side as well. A lot of people are being adopting. I mean, you saw the contributions and everything from Microsoft and everything. So at least what I've seen is that it didn't take that much time to get to where we are, mainly because we had a lot of lessons learned on the Linux side, which we could go back here and reuse, and we could actually push to have these changes done. So question for you guys is like, where do you think that is, one? And what would you say as like the things that you would see that things need to change around that? And then, if you first
I'll
those
just
two.
clarify real quick. You said, like around like Microsoft containers specifically?
Yeah,
or?
So in terms of like, I'm kind of biased, so mostly on the Docker containers for what Microsoft is doing at this point. So 2016 now at least I've seen every release, it's getting much, much better in terms of like even simple networking issues and stuff and everything, right? So we do have some workloads running on Swarm today. And of course, it's going to become J on the Kubernetes side. Maybe I'll make this very open on where do you think the community is today and where do you see that maybe in the next few months or so. And maybe even after that, adopting it and running it in production.
I don't know. I think we have learned a lot of Linux, a lot of lessons from the Linux stuff, and well, I think most of us are Linux engineers, right? Like we're all okay. Yeah.
So perfect question for you guys then.
Well, I've worked in a couple of Microsoft shops, but Linux is my bread and butter, and so I would say that they're catching up quickly. The Microsoft containers, and especially what we saw today from like with Duffel, was really, really impressive. And we're really excited about the CNAB stuff. And I know that Microsoft doesn't sleep on this, so they're gonna be pushing out stuff rapidly now, I think. So
got it.
Yeah, I know we've been experimenting with Windows containers on our end, and as soon as some of the other teams that are managing and supporting our Windows-based applications figured out, we can containerize these and move these to Docker. They were immediately hounding us almost every day. Do you have the Windows cluster up yet? Do you have the Windows cluster up yet? Can I start working on my stuff yet? And it's fantastic. So I think a lot of organizations are just starting that journey, but I definitely see the platform as being ready for prime time, absolutely, and the community's really coming together around it. And I can't imagine that there's not other organizations like ours where people are really excited about it for all sorts of reasons.
We're kind of hearing the same stuff from our Windows department right now, especially because of the whole Windows 2008 thing.
Actually, I'm curious. Like, what would you say? Like, in terms of like, are they? So there's one thing is just move the problem somewhere else, or they feel that as a good opportunity to take it and actually move it now into Docker or containers. Like, what is your take on it?
Their boss has an idea that it's a good idea to containerize it. I agree.
First time a boss thought about this. Okay.
Because the thing is that we could standardize it using some of the already existing pipelines we have. We can get Windows nodes in our enterprise in UCP. We can manage it the same way. Control permissions with collections in UCP and so on. The major thing and problem here is that we're probably going to use a lot of resources to get the Windows team to actually catch up to all of the stuff that's been done on the Linux platform with all of the standardization and in our case, a lot of the whole immutable idea of running UCP and our whole infrastructure as an immutable cluster. That's a really big step for the Windows guys. And again, there's a lot of processes that need to be redefined and change procedures that need to be kicked out and simplified. That's probably the major problem and issue I could imagine that's going to be hit with a lot of Windows shops.
Okay. Cool. So switching in, well, again, let me know if I'm running out of time or something. Okay. So switching in terms of like, this is again a question which I kind of run into, the concept of one huge cluster versus multiple small clusters and generally in terms of spinning up, right? I'm at least of the philosophy of having, just you don't take one cluster in general and just spread across the whole geography, and it's much better to have that. So now the concept of federation comes into play. What I'd like to find out is mostly your view on the whole concept of multi-federation, right? So now, in terms of like having these clusters, do you think the multi-federation is something that's really going to like what sort of influence do you think it'll have, and like could we do it or do without it? What do you think are pros and cons?
We're really excited about the federation tools from
Nice.
Docker Enterprise.
Nice.
Being able to have a single pane of glass, really to look at every single cluster and every application you're deploying, every node, everything is, I think, paramount to
Nice.
being able to run an effective operation shop.
Got it.
Well said.
That was quick. That's what I hear all the time too.
I
Yeah.
just want to add here, it depends on what context you deliver with the federation. So do you deliver all the visibility from the clusters in the federation, or is it just a subset what we need? So it's something we have to verify and check with you
Yeah,
guys.
it's always the balance, right? Because even if you take a simple cluster, there's actually so much data about the cluster, from the node to the container to the logging to everything. Like, you could want to display everything on the screen itself, and then you have a cluttered dashboard over which you're like figuring out where to go search these things.
Well, I think I can't remember if Steve or Scott said it yesterday, but data is the new oil, right?
Yeah.
And metadata is absolutely essential to what we do. We spend more time, I think, trying to figure out how to correctly place metadata and make sure we're getting it back than we actually spend deploying or building anything else. So.
Got it. Cool. Maybe my last question on this is the whole security piece, right? Maybe just jumping a little bit, at least during the early stages. That's the first thing. My roadblocks were always from I would be able to go through and talk to the app team. The app team would say good, networking team good, and then I have this big block, and then there's this huge 80-page document I would get saying fill up all these 80 things over here in this document and give it back to me. And about 80 in those 80 pages, but 90% of this doesn't make sense in the Docker world and container world. Of course, that's kind of changed a lot. Maybe if you guys could add maybe one or two roadblocks you hit from your security team on I'm pretty sure you would have, especially when you're talking with Docker containers and kernel and the OS. Maybe some good tidbits you guys can share.
I know for us, when we were first getting started and we were ready to release our first thing into production, so security was running through it, and the biggest hurdle initially was just lack of understanding. They didn't understand the ephemeral nature of containers at first, and kind of how we don't patch, we just tear it down and replace it with a new one. But the easiest thing for us as Docker Enterprise customers was showing them DTR and the scanning ability. And so a lot of the stuff they were already looking at, we'd already received reports on those, and we've resolved those. So they had that made them, what was the phrase I used to use all the time? It gave them the warm and fuzzies.
Nice.
And that was incredibly helpful in overcoming that hurdle. But the biggest thing that we've dealt with is just the lack of understanding, having to really explain how containers work, and it's not like traditional Patch Tuesday kind of stuff.
Yeah.
For us, we didn't actually hit that many problems with the security department.
Okay.
They were okay with the whole idea of the isolation with containers, because our approach was really constantly, this is the current lay of the land with our system. If we do this, it gets a teeny bit better. and then a teeny bit, and then we just build on that, and there were completely
small steps.
small steps. If we could just keep increasing the security, using some of the features in DTR, reporting back to developers, hey, you just pushed this image. I can see you have some issues you need to resolve. Use a newer version of this library and so on. They were happy because they could see the benefits. So for us, it was pretty easy.
Nice.
I love what he said about, bit by bit. One of my favorite books, I'm sure you guys have already read it, but The Phoenix Project.
Yeah.
And I quote it constantly. But one of the things is 5 minutes a day is better than 3 hours a week, right? If you're doing it every single day, even just 5 or 10 minutes in a week, it will be better than if you just sit down for 3 hours once and did it, right? So just constantly keep trying to iterate more, in smaller bits.
Nice.
Yeah, if I can add to what Loki told, our security team at the time was not in a state where they actually had the insight that they now get from the DTR scans. So they were mostly concerned about things like viruses spreading and making sure that we don't open any firewall ports that are not supposed to be opened, this sort of thing, right? So they also had to evolve and catch up in a sense, the same as some other departments at the company. But you can see this, it's not only about containers, although they're a great part of it, but it's also a matter of this whole DevOps approach, which makes you think differently about how you work, and that's at least as important. Containers just help with some of those making that mindset implementable. Yeah, I guess I'd say that way.
So also for Bosch, so in first place, we didn't have any requirements to put any security in first place. But one thing what I can mention is that we had security in place by the default antivirus software deployed on every server, and this slowed down the performance totally of Docker. So we had actually to, because it has just-in-time file access checks, and so we have to disable it to enable cron jobs once a day or something like that. Because every file was checked. But actually, in longer term, yes, security said you have to do something, but take your time and step by step.
Cool, awesome, thank you. I think do want to maybe get a couple of questions from the audience just to see if you guys have any questions for them.
Yeah, any questions from the floor?
Thank you.
I have a couple. I would like to know which kind of topology of multi-cluster, or how big is your cluster of environment on Docker? Like, just to have some measures.
I want the Bosch guy to speak, because theirs is impressive.
Okay, so I can't tell you the total number, but what I can say, it's multiple clusters. So our service, we sell dedicated container clusters. My customer might be also selling it to its internal project teams, but actually we are globally, and so we have clusters in sizes between 6 and 50 nodes usually, and for all kind of use cases, from HPC use case up to IoT use case. So. And yeah, it's really many clusters, so federations would be really helpful. So now we have to do the integration and monitoring of, it's really hard.
And because we're on-prem, all of we only have 3 clusters, 4 now. I think 4 clusters now. And they're all relatively small. I think 25 nodes is the largest one that we have. We really don't have that sort of demand at the moment. We are looking at moving to the cloud next year. And by that I say cloud, we'll probably deploy to everything. Azure, Amazon, Google, and whatnot. And obviously we'll have more clusters then, but hopefully by then we'll have the federation stuff worked out.
Yep. And same for us. Again, because we're not a multinational company, we're only based in Denmark. Our services are mostly for internal use, and also supporting, all of the integration stuff for some of our customers, and our Salesforce platform and third-party stuff. So I think we're roughly around 80-ish nodes in total. So nothing extreme, but we have most of the stuff in one big cluster internally, and we're redesigning the DMZ stuff at a later point.
Yeah, currently, well, we have 2 data center locations, but it's one logical data center, so it's easy to ration about, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Next question.
If I can, I have another question.
Yeah, please.
I don't think anyone else has raised their hand. So until someone else raises their hand, you go ahead.
I would like to know if you can give us some insights about capacity management, like when you decide to get your cluster bigger, or just how do you measure something? Like just
Again, ours is pretty static. So we kind of, when we started designing the cluster, we said, okay, we have these different stages. We know this stage and this stage is probably going to be the mostly used. Let's double it compared to some of the other stages. We're kind of looking into defining a scope, saying like, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, where, okay, do we need a threshold to say when we remove a node and it starts up again, the time from 0 to 100 where all of our services are running on that node should probably not be more than 15 minutes. Because again, from a management perspective, you don't want to sit and wait for over an hour for everything to start on a node. So you need to kind of figure out where your thresholds are and then go from there. If you take that metric, then you can probably, when you change your nodes, you can see, okay, it takes more than 15 minutes, probably need some more nodes in that stage. Again, it depends.
And we're sort of the same way. We use Ansible for just about everything that we can't do any other way. So most of our clusters are built that way, and we're using the Docker certified infrastructure to help us build up our clusters. And we typically know what that load's going to look like. And so like our testing cluster is our biggest cluster. It's where everything, most of our other environments exist. So it's pretty beefy compared to everything else.
Same.
Very familiar story.
thank you.
What else? Who else?
Big or small questions?
Don't be shy.
You want to hear how we pull down production? Or
Lots of stories.
automation is great. It's also horrible sometimes when you make mistakes. But then you just add more smoke tests.
All right, last chance. Any other questions? All right. One more? All right. Why not?
Just to know, what kind of application do you run? Like, is it like the legacy kind? What kind is it? Like, is it JBoss or WebSphere or something else?
A lot of them. We have JBoss, Spring Boot, Spring Boot 2. We have, I'm trying to think what else is out there.
Yeah, I mean, we're supporting services that we've written internally in a number of languages. Java is going to be the most predominant, but we've got Node.js, we've got Go, we've got Python, we've got a little bit of .NET, a little bit of PHP, and then we've got a number of vendor applications that we're running within Docker as well. All of our source control, all of our logging, monitoring, metrics systems, those are all containerized as well.
Yeah, we bootstrap everything in our cluster with a stack we call Infobase. Yeah, we're really good at naming stuff. That just is a collection of all the different third-party, open source, internal stuff that we wrote to add to the platform and actually offer solutions to teams.
It's things like reverse proxy or metrics collection, logging, log forwarding, this kind of thing. So we run as much as we can in Docker, and because it's Docker, we can decide one day, well, okay, why not support Python if somebody has the use case, or why not support Golang? Well, why not just do it because we need to use Golang, right, as operators? So also a variety in our case.
Having the approach of also having your infrastructure base stuff in containers, it gives you the ability to actually just say at some point, okay, we did this a year ago, we used that product, it doesn't suit our needs anymore. Okay, let's drop something else in and replace it. We started out with HA proxy, and we hit a limit at some point just because of the usage of the cluster. So we had to drop traffic in instead. We did that in a day.
And a night.
Yeah, everything blew up. So we had to do it, but we had the backup plan, and that was traffic.
Oh yeah, and to answer the last part of your question, we also run WebLogic in containers. Those are the legacy apps that we moved that were previously deployed on a few very large servers. We now have them each in their own container with their own individual WebLogic server, so that if something crashes, first of all, we know what crashes, and we also know that it doesn't affect the other applications running on the same VM. A huge benefit as compared to how it was before.
Extreme benefit in regards to WebLogic, because again, every container is a single WebLogic installation, so we don't hit any of the standard issues with WebLogic where it's a single point of entry for deployment. Here it's a part of the startup process for the container to deploy the application it needs. And then you could we scaled the old WebLogic application that was biggest one used in the company from 2 instances up to 9 when we containerized it. It's like, yeah, 9 is a good number, so let's do that. And we've been running with that approach ever since for the legacy stuff. The Spring Boot stuff that we use for the Greenfield applications, they follow standard practices, best practices a lot in regards to containerizing.
One last thing I can say is that user-facing applications that hold state, that are based on frameworks that don't externalize the state, it's a good idea to deploy multiple instances of those, so that if one goes down, for whatever reason it could be, you lose a smaller amount of sessions, right? That's something we were happy about, having deployed 9 instances instead of just 2. Because when we first containerized that application, we did have some issues because we hadn't foreseen everything. So that's just a good approach to reduce the risk.
Yeah, an important note about that, because we came from an environment where everything was running together, we didn't really know what application actually caused another application to fail. When we started containerizing and pulling everything out, we suddenly could see, okay, that application is shit. That one needs to be fixed. There's a leak there, so we actually need to restart it every day, okay, every week, and so on. So you find some of the naughty bits when you start containerizing the legacy stuff. The good thing about if you start with all greenfield stuff is that you start from scratch, and you do a lot of stuff after more standard best practice stuff.
Thank you.
All right, one more.
How do you guys manage?
We manage everything in an awesome way.
Sorry. How do you guys manage your monitoring needs for your application? Does you guys use Prometheus, or you got in-house application for monitoring needs?
All of the above.
We are using Prometheus. We are also using a lot of the vSphere tools.
Okay.
We're using Ansible. Okay. We've got several things set up to help us monitor, and not only monitor and alert on, but take action on next as well.
Okay.
Yeah, we're using as much open source and on-prem stuff as we can for some of the complexities related with microservices monitoring within larger clusters. We do have a cloud vendor for that portion, but just about everything else we're doing ourselves, mostly through Elasticsearch, Prometheus, and then the various front ends and integrations with that.
Sure. Do you guys have in-house products or in-house application? Do you guys move that into a container or something like that?
Yes, both.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Very well done. If you have more questions, they'll be around, and You can grab them in the hall, those sorts of things. But I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.